Hi, this is Evelyn Lopez. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the Earth911.com podcast for the week of January 21st, 2019. We are recording at the fantastic Moonyard Studio in Tacoma, Washington. But I have to say, it's a little cold outside. So we're going to talk about how to survive and thrive this winter. I'd like to welcome everyone on the line today. Mitch Ratcliffe, our Earth911 publisher. Mitch, where are you coming to us from today?
Oh, I'm calling from my home office today as I continue to work diligently to make Earth911 better and better.
Excellent. So from chilly Lakewood.
Yes, right. And we're having flurries of snow.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. We're not seeing any in Tacoma. For our listeners, Tacoma and Lakewood are about 5 miles apart. So that's pretty amazing. And we have our Earth911 writers, Sarah Lozanova and Trey Granger here. Sarah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm in icy mid-coast Maine right now.
Ooh, how cold is it in Maine today?
Oh, it's probably about 20.
Oh, that just sounds really cold to me.
Oh, it's balmy.
Balmy for Maine, maybe. Well, and Trey, where are you today?
I am in sunny Arizona.
Okay, and make us jealous. How warm is it in Arizona today?
It's only 58, which is cold for us.
That is cold for you, so you're chilled out too.
Yeah, I'll be layering up today.
Excellent, excellent. We'll have all kinds of good tips and ideas for keeping warm during the cold of winter.
Although 58 is T-shirt weather in the Northwest.
Well, yes, but you get used to that warm sunshine. So, Mitch, tell us a little bit about interviews that might be coming up in the near future.
Yeah, we've been doing our innovator interviews and did a little pause over the holidays and are starting back up. We'll be introducing another series as well, which is Conversations with Green Publishers. We're going to do interviews with people who are doing great work covering various aspects of sustainability, recycling, and the environment. So we're hoping to get that started in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be back to having breakthrough technology and business and product designs, conversations with people on the air as well.
Well, that's excellent. I really appreciate some of the people that you've interviewed in the groups that have now started to provide story content to the site, too. I think that really gives us a lot more depth on what's going on in the world.
Well, and anybody listening, if you are involved in communicating about the environment, we'd love to talk to you about how we can help amplify you. Another thing that's coming up that is going to be kind of fun is we're going to be sponsoring the residential recycling seminar at the upcoming ISRI, that's the Institute for Scrap Recycling Industries, conference in Los Angeles. So we're going to be facilitating a discussion about how to change the local recycling market for the better. And we'll have a number of expert guests speaking on that panel. You'll be able to hear that on Earth911 after the event, but you'll be seeing coverage of that running up to it.
Oh, that's great. That'll be really interesting. Well, let's talk about the weather. It is cold outside. It is January. What can you do to survive, thrive, and make the most of winter? Well, we have some tips for you. First, tips for a warm and cozy home. How about heating issues? What are some tips that we can share with our listeners? Sarah, you want to start with that?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people live in homes that aren't particularly energy efficient. Mm-hmm. And there are some ways for people to do kind of DIY energy audits to get a sense of where their home is leaking heat, for example. That's a common one. So there are some simple things people can do, like putting plastic over the windows, or some things are a little bit more involved, like insulation. Mm-hmm. But air sealing, a lot of times people can make big strides towards plugging gaps, mm-hmm. Where cold air is able to come in mm-hmm. through air sealing around windows and cracks and gaps in the home.
Yeah, we do two things. We do the plastic on the windows, which we have found reduces the lost heat pretty substantially. I mean, you can't measure it, but it feels like 20 to 30% of the lost heat just stops when we do that. The other is we're using the seals on the bottom of doors. Mm-hmm. I think they're called bolsters. But those have been extremely effective for us. They get rid of the drafts, the ones that you can feel along your feet during the winter.
Mm-hmm. How do you actually when you talk about sealing up your window with plastic, how do you actually do that?
Basically, you can purchase a thin plastic, like from the hardware store, mm-hmm. that's clear. And it usually comes with some sort of adhesive. And so it typically adheres somehow to the frame around the window on the interior.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just adds an extra layer of protection. Another thing people can do is get insulating curtains too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, very good. Very good. And didn't we have a comment at some point in the past when we were talking about bubble wrap being used for window insulation?
I'm not sure about that.
I don't recall that, but that would make sense in some of the less decorative windows. You know, if you have basement windows, that
right.
would add an extra layer of insulation.
Right. Well, what have you done? The thing that I'm a little bit concerned about in my house is our fireplaces. We've got a fireplace upstairs and downstairs. We actually never really use them. And the damper is closed, but I still think it's got to be leaking cold air in or sucking warm air out.
Definitely a problem. We actually sealed ours.
Did you?
I wonder whether fireplaces and chimneys are even worth keeping anymore because of the problems that you're describing,
mm-hmm.
as well as the maintenance that goes with them. We actually got a large poster board, set it into the fireplace, and effectively sealed it that way. And then we put decorative stuff in front of the fireplace, or where the fireplace was.
Yeah, I may try that.
That's a great idea because fireplaces can funnel hot air up and out of the home.
Right.
And then it actually pulls air in through gaps and cracks in the home exterior, like through windows and such. So it can basically bring in cold air while venting out hot air, which is about the opposite of what we want to do in the winter.
Right. That's about the worst of all options. Okay. Well, I will look at that when I get home. What are some other things we can do to keep our homes warm? What about adding insulation?
A lot of people will insulate their attic. And if for people who are a little bit more handy, that's something that can potentially be a DIY weekend project. But attics are an important one because hot air rises. So a lot of times hot air can escape through the attic.
Right.
Would you do that yourself, or would you have somebody do it just because of the concerns about doing it well?
I think it depends on budget concerns and how technical the job would be and the skills of the person doing it. I think the best case is typically to hire somebody, especially energy auditors can use tools such as an infrared camera or a blower door test to really pinpoint where heat and air are leaking out of the home.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you've mentioned energy auditors. Is that the type of service that's available from your utility? Will they often have people who can come out and sort of look at where you might be losing heat or using more than you expect you are?
It really varies by location, but there definitely are utilities that offer such programs, or in some areas there are rebates if you hire an energy auditor where it can be discounted or even free.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a really good idea.
And we do have a series coming up that Sarah is working on doing a home audit, picking a home auditor, and then acting on the plan that the auditor provides you.
Oh, great. Yeah, that would be really helpful. Well, what are some things that are a little bit less high maintenance that you can do in your daily life? Let's talk about layering your clothing. Trey, you had a comment earlier when we were offline about fleece. What are your thoughts on wearing fleece as an extra layer of warmth?
So people might be aware of this, but fleece is made of polyester, which is very similar to the plastic resin used for water bottles and soda bottles. So a lot of manufacturers, Patagonia was actually the first back in the early 90s, are making fleece jackets and fleece sweaters and fleece blankets out of recycled plastic. So it's a great way for you to kill two birds with one stone, keep yourself warm and reduce your energy while also using recycled content from those bottles.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good tip. I have a couple of fleece jackets and sweaters, and they're not great in high wind. If you're going to be outside in the wind, you really want something that's not so air permeable, but they're wonderful inside. And one of the things I like about the fleece is that it washes very easily. So it's not as prone to staining, and it's pretty easy maintenance. What other clothing items should people either look for or maybe avoid?
I would say having warm bedding is a great idea because then people can drop the thermostat at night.
Oh, very good.
And that can save a lot of energy since we often spend, 6-8 hours sleeping in our bedrooms.
Yes, that's a really good point. Well, and you know what? I have always heard that if you're going to be layering, especially if you're doing outdoors activity, cotton is not as good as wool. And silk, if you can get like silk undergarments, they're more pricey, but they also are very good at trapping warmth.
Just out of curiosity, how cold does everybody keep their house? Our thermostat is set to 64 degrees. I know that's pretty cold, but we do a layering in the winter, including in some cases coats. Mm-hmm. But it substantially lowers our heat bill. How cold is appropriate for all of you?
I actually also keep my thermostat around 64, Mitch, but I live in a house with a passive solar design. Mm-hmm. So on sunny days, my house, I can leave the thermostat on 64 and the house will warm up to the low 70s.
Right.
So, and then I also try to circulate the air around because the rooms with south-facing windows become the warmest. So I'll sometimes set up a fan to pull the cold air out of the bedrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my house also has solar panels, so it's a little easier for me to heat and cool it. But as you can imagine, when it's 58 degrees outside, it's not as much of a need for heating.
But you also, the solar allows you to stay cooler without using non-renewable energy too, right?
Yeah, definitely more of an issue in the summertime.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I'm probably the worst about this, and I think I mentioned offline a couple weeks ago. I have a Raynaud's syndrome, which is makes your fingertips and your toes get cold and numb, and they lose sensation. So that's my excuse. I don't know if that's a really good one, but I keep my house. I don't tell my husband this because I'm supposed to actually vary it, but I secretly set it so it's just at 70, and it just sits there. And that's why I'm looking at solar panels this year, because I feel incredible guilt about this, that I'm, sort of heating the house to a temperature that's a little warmer than probably I need to, but it's the only way I can keep my fingers from going numb.
Well, but you're talking about a trade-off. Is if with numb fingers you can't do the things you need to do, and you said I'm probably the least perfect, but that's the thing about all of us, is that in some way we're inefficient in ways that we may not even recognize yet.
I think that's true.
We can make these changes incrementally and start to add up to something that really does change our overall impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's interesting. I had put out on Facebook that I was going to be looking at solar panels this year, and a lot of people said, it's not really a great deal because at what point does it actually pay for itself? You have to have them for years and years before they pay for themselves. And it was a very interesting insight into the way people look at making home repairs, because I don't know if they'll really pay for themselves, but I do know that it will make me feel a lot better about, if I do have to keep my house a little bit warmer, at least I'm doing it through a better energy source. Now, in fairness, in Tacoma, most of our utility is coming from hydro and quite a bit of solar as well. But even still, the solar panels would be better.
That's true, actually, than it used to be. The state of Washington just announced yesterday that its GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions, have risen 6.7% since 2010.
Really?
Which is actually down substantially from the year 2000. But the reason that that's happening is a combination of growing population and more people driving. But what surprised me is it's also the increased use of coal to generate electricity.
Now that is a surprise and an unwelcome one, isn't it? I mean, we really should be able to do better than that.
But we make an assumption that because we live in the hydroelectric rich Northwest, and there's also a lot of wind power here, that our energy is green. But I shouldn't say increasingly, but there is a growing share of it which is less than green.
Yeah.
Let's say bad for us.
Yeah. I'm going to have to say, getting on my soapbox a little bit here, there is a continuing pressure to sort of increase that. We have, some initiatives for liquefied natural gas, which in and of itself seems fine. But when you look at where the gas comes from fracking fields, it's not very environmentally sound. So it's a constant battle. That's definitely true.
Well, and we live in a time when we're being offered bad alternatives that are really outdated because somehow that's makes people feel safer, and it shouldn't.
Right.
Getting back to the topic of solar panels paying for themselves, I think in Washington, it might take a little bit longer than in other places, but it's kind of an interesting concept because if you, say, built a patio on your house, it might increase your property value, but you don't get any direct cost savings out of it. But solar is one of the few home improvements where you can get significant cost savings and it actually pays for itself over time. The average... Nationally, it's usually in the 6 to 8 year range that solar pays for itself, but it might be a little bit more in Washington because I believe you have lower than average electricity rates.
Well, in Washington State, the payback time is between 7 and 10 years based on the review I just recently went through to consider solar. And I'm going to have to cut down a couple of trees in my backyard to make it worthwhile. But what we would get afterwards is, in addition to the value of the house being higher because it's got the solar, which pays for at least half the electricity that the house uses, you get the tax credits, you get the various other rewards for participating in this program, and you've got the ability over time to generate power and sell it if you would like to, and that's a net gain. The other thing is it makes the grid more resilient because you've got more local sources of generation that can be used to balance power in heavy load times or when you have an interruption.
Oh, I like that idea. You know, one of the reasons that they're looking at, and they are in fact building an LNG refinery in Tacoma, is to do peak shaving with making more natural gas available during peak times. And so you're right. If more people had solar, there would be less demand on the systems, and we may never need that peak shaving type.
Solar often corresponds with the peak time because it's often in the afternoon that demand increases, and that's a good time for solar energy production.
Well, I'm for it. And as I go through this process, I'll report back too. I don't have any trees that overhang my house, so I have to think I'm in a pretty good location, but we'll find out. Well, we had a couple of stories that we also thought we would mention in terms of warm and cozy homes. And Sarah, you have a good story on changing your interior for increased warmth, changing your lighting. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, lighting can be responsible in some homes for quite a bit of electricity use. So keeping that in mind can save a lot of electricity. And one of the biggest things to look out for is the types of bulbs that you have in your light fixture, especially light fixtures that tend to remain on for a long time, like maybe a porch light or the lights that you often turn on and will leave on for hours at a time. So one of the top things I recommend is to seek out any of the incandescent light bulbs that are in the house and halogens, and then to replace them with compact fluorescent bulbs or LED bulbs. And that's one of the best ways to save a lot of energy, is just by swapping out inefficient bulbs. And it can make a difference of, a 5 or 10-fold difference as far as energy use for the same amount of light.
And Sarah, something to add on to that, I think when I looked into replacing bulbs with LEDs 5 to 10 years ago, it was super expensive. Now it's much, much cheaper.
Absolutely. That's very true. And there's more options, like for the hue of the lights and things like that. And then a lot of utilities have incentive programs too, where they offer rebates or discounts for buying LED lights. So that's absolutely true. They've come a long way.
Well, let me ask you about the recycling of LED lights. And I think we had something on this a few months ago, but we have quite a few compact fluorescent lights in my house, and I know when those burn out, we try to take those in to the household hazardous waste facility for recycling. Do I have to do anything similar with LED lights?
I researched that when I was writing this article, and I had trouble finding national programs for LED light recycling, but a lot of local waste disposal programs or recycling centers do have LED recycling programs. So I would recommend people to look on a local level. CFLs too contain some heavy metals, so it's really important to recycle those and not send them to landfills. And there's also a lot of local recycling programs, or there's also a link in the article for mail-in CFL recycling. And actually Home Depot offers a program too in many of its stores.
Mm-hmm. Lowe's as well. Now, I understand that there might be some heavy metals in colored LEDs, particularly LED.
Yeah, I believe that's the case. I found kind of contradictory information when I was researching this, but there were some studies that were saying that there are heavy metals in LED lights. Okay.
Well, that's good advice. And I think especially this time of year, certainly if you live in the northern part of the country, your lights are on a lot. I mean, our daylight hours are pretty scarce through January, so the lights are on sometimes around the clock, certainly well into the morning and starting about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So more efficient lighting can make a huge difference.
Yeah, and as much as possible using natural daylighting. So during the day, opening window treatments. And that's also a good way in the winter to kind of naturally heat your home. Mm-hmm. Getting back to what we were talking about before, like closing curtains at night can be helpful for keeping the heat in. But then especially for south-facing windows and also east and west-facing windows, it's good to really open those window treatments during the day to let the light in.
That's a good point. One of the stories that's up on the website that I thought was a good one for cold weather is 10 delicious vegan slow cooker dishes. And this is my suggestion is for warming up your home and just feeling better about the winter is cook a comfort meal. One of the nice things about slow cooker cooking is, first of all, you can put it together the night before, turn it on in the morning, and leave it all day, and it'll be ready for you when you get home in the evening. But the second thing is it's actually a very low energy way of cooking. Slow cookers generally use far less electricity than you would use if you were heating up your stove or even your range top. So it's a good way to do it. It does take some planning. And at the Earth911.com website, we have a nice article about vegan slow cooker recipes. And in particular, and what this is, so there's recipes for the variety of things from an herb pound cake, vegetable lasagna, to unsweetened applesauce and a chocolate lava cake. The one I was going to try, and I will be trying, is the butternut squash coconut chili. And the reason is that I have a little bit of a prejudice against vegan foods that are trying to not be vegan, like macaroni and cheese. I don't really want vegan macaroni and cheese. I want some really good vegetable dishes that are vegan. And this recipe for the butternut squash coconut chili is very intriguing because it's not only a lot of good vegetables and herbs, but it also has butternut squash, which I like very much, and uses coconut milk. So I'm expecting it to be a more of a creamy, nutty, sort of more of a casserole probably than I would say a traditional chili.
And now's a great time of year to potentially buy local squash.
Oh, good point.
And one thing to keep in mind when you're cooking vegan is that the materials that you're using have different carbon loads, and so look for things that are not shipped a long distance. Mm-hmm. That's the main thing. So shopping locally, and another thing to mention is we have a lot of different recipe articles, and you should be applying those same criteria when using things that are not vegan. So if you're going to use milk or eggs, for instance, mm-hmm. in something, look for local, organically grown and free-range chicken, for instance, that is so the eggs are not being grown under really bad ecological circumstances.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. Well, and so with that point in mind, then maybe rather than try out the butternut squash coconut chili, I should look at the curried vegetable and chickpea stew, because the coconut milk is certainly not coming locally in Tacoma.
Hey, Evelyn, can I ask a dumb question from
Please.
The novice chef that hopefully some of our listeners also have?
Yes.
Is a slow cooker the same as a crock pot?
It is. So crock pot is the brand name. So people often say crock pot, but it technically you may look for recipes under slow cooker where they've been sort of careful not to use the crock pot brand name. You can search for recipes with either one. I've used both. I search usually slow cooker and crock pot because people use them pretty interchangeably. The new kitchen item, the hot item, I guess for about 2 years now, has been the Instapot. And an Instapot is sort of a combination of a bit of a slow cooker and a pressure cooker. And so it will also, you can also do the preload and leave your meals for the day, but it also works really well for cooking some items very quickly. So if you wanted to cook chicken breasts for dinner, you could do so in about 15 minutes because of the pressure cooker aspects. I haven't tried the Instapot yet, but I think you can also look for recipes for those. And in that case, I'm not sure what the generic term is. The only term I've ever heard is Instapot. So what other tips can we give? Trey, you had an article that I thought was, I'm not sure, was it your article, the dealing with recycling antifreeze?
It was. And while we're talking about different names for things, antifreeze is also known as coolant. That actually serves two purposes.
Okay.
Cools your engine down during the summer and it heats it up during the winter. So it's much more popular for its antifreeze nature this time of year when you're trying to get your car started in 20 degrees and the snow is making it less difficult for the engine to turn over.
You must have that trouble all the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about appropriately recycling antifreeze or coolant.
So the really great thing is a lot of times when we're talking about fluids you have in your garage, they aren't recyclable. So you're looking for a place that you can properly dispose of them to keep them out of landfills. In the case of antifreeze, it is fully recyclable. They just make new antifreeze out of it. So they basically will just take what you have and remove any of the contaminants, like grease from the engine or other parts that might have gotten mixed in throughout the time you've had it, and make brand new antifreeze out of it. A few things people should be aware of. Antifreeze tastes really good. And hopefully no one's ever tried it before. In fact, it was an original ingredient in Fireball whiskey.
Right.
But it's important to properly dispose of it, because if you pour it down the drain or something like that, or leave it out, kids can get into it, animals can get into it, and they'll get poisoned because it's definitely a toxic material if ingested. Another thing to be aware of is, even though antifreeze comes in different colors, you want to make sure that when you're buying it, buy the color that you have already in your car. So you can go to your coolant dispenser and see what color it is. If it's green, don't go buy orange because they're not compatible with each other.
Oh, I never knew that.
That I actually recently had that comment from my oil change. They said you need to add more antifreeze. It was coolant because it was summertime. And they said, but we don't have the right kind, which surprised me. But there are different kinds. And as Trey's saying, they don't mix. So be careful. Don't just go buy something and pour it in.
But I would definitely encourage people, especially right now, and then when summer comes, just get a bottle and put it in the trunk of your car. I mean, make sure it's sealed so it's not going to leak. But if your car ever breaks down, it's going to be good to have some antifreeze. I've had times in the heat of summer in Phoenix where my car just said stop engine because it just wasn't working. I had to pour some antifreeze in to cool it down. So it's better to have it than to not have it, but make sure you dispose of it properly when you get the chance. So along that lines, where you would take it, a lot of auto shops that accept used motor oil will take antifreeze as part of that program. So places like Advanced Auto and AutoZone, call them up first to verify that their store participates, but a lot of them will accept antifreeze at no cost. And it doesn't really expire. So don't feel like you have to get rid of it because it's been in your car. Once you open it, there's about an 8-year shelf life. But if it's unopened, you don't have to worry about, I bought this 10 years ago, I need to get rid of it. It'll be good forever, unless you're just trying to get rid of stuff in your house. If you can't find a retailer, I would definitely encourage you to check out a household hazardous waste program. Even though we said earlier that it is recyclable, those programs do take materials that are recyclable, like paint and antifreeze and motor oil, because they want to recycle them and keep them out of landfills and the waterways. So it's an excellent opportunity for you to probably dispose of those materials.
Good. Excellent. Well, one of the other things we wanted to talk about today, when this podcast airs, it'll actually be on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, January 21st, and many communities around the country organize a day of service instead of, they say, a day on instead of a day off. And so we thought it would be good to do a little bit roundup of ideas for people getting involved. And I'll start by saying, what I've found is social media is an excellent way of finding out what's going on in your community. You can find out about cleanup activities. You can find out about service activities or other volunteer activities. So I would always suggest that if you're looking to get involved in your community, you start out with a local Facebook postings and see what's going on. But what other suggestions do we have?
Well, I would. The thing that I look for on Martin Luther King Day is a public service opportunity, and in particular in Tacoma, as an example, there are 3 different park cleanups that people participate in. They're 3-hour events, and you go out and do work at Point Defiance Park, which is the second largest public park in the United States. For those of you who did not know that, and it's a great way to get together with other people in your community and learn about it. So the site for Tacoma, and there'll be one for virtually every city. This one's run by Metro Parks Tacoma, and it's called Chip In, Citizens Helping Improve Parks. And they have an annual tradition of honoring Dr. King's vision of a beloved community by creating a better community.
Right. That's nice.
It's such a great way to bring people together, too, that wouldn't necessarily even know each other, to really create a sense of a greater community by giving back.
My experience with community is that they tend to come together in crises. I think the only time I ever met my neighbors in San Francisco was after the Loma Prieta earthquake, when we all came outside because our buildings might fall down. We need to get past that. We need to pull together, and the best way to do it is to get out and find something in common.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good suggestion.
What I'll be doing this weekend, there's actually a Museum of Science and Sustainability in the Phoenix area. So I'm going to be building exhibits. It's a mobile museum where they go around to different schools and present to children and students about ways they can be more sustainable and ways they can learn about science. So look for those opportunities in your area, anything museum-based. There's a lot of ways that science and the environment are directly related. So see if they're willing to take a volunteer for a day, or see if you can give one day a month as part of your resolution for the year.
Those are all fantastic ideas. And, Mitch, I also had listed down here that there's a really nice story up on our website about sea turtle rescuers. This really only applies if you're in South Florida, but tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is a story by Patty Roth. It was published on January 11th, and it's a great story of people doing good things for animals who are actually confused by us. So sea turtle hatchlings along the Florida coast pop up out of the ground. There's a 24 to 25 mile stretch of beach where there are thousands of nests, and each of these nests produces 75 to 125 little turtles. And more than a third of them pop up out of the sand, see the lights of the city, and run towards the lights of the city rather than running towards the ocean where they're supposed to go. So it is it's a real problem. It, of course, contributes to the loss of the species, but it's also a great volunteer opportunity. You spend the evening from about 7:30 to 4:30 a.m. patrolling the beach. You can't use flashlights because, again, that's another form of light pollution that would disorient the baby turtles. And as they head in the wrong direction, you scoop them up and you take them toward the water so that they can orient correctly. And there's a lot of training that goes into handling the animals appropriately before you do this. So there's an organization, Sea Turtle Overnight Protection, or STOP, which is about 12 years old. And they and other organizations like Turtle Treks organize overnight projects. This runs from June to September. So if you're thinking this is interesting, there's time this year to get on the schedule and go and do that. You can show up and do the work as a volunteer. There's a $25 fee for the stuff they help you, they give you to use. Or you can become part of a voluntourism program that includes housing for the period of the hatching season, And that one it's a little more expensive because the travel and everything is involved. It's about $1,500. But you can really make a huge difference. And the stories that Patty shares of people, just their sense of satisfaction at the end of the night, knowing that they saved the lives of dozens of tiny animals who are going to make a splash in the world and hopefully help to have turtles recover. It's an inspiring story, and it's something, if you want to look forward to a great trip this summer, consider doing.
Yeah, I think. And the story has great pictures, too. It just looks like it would be so wonderful.
Wow. And one more thing I would recommend to people, especially right now, because we have the shutdown, and you've probably seen the news about national parks that are getting a lot of garbage and graffiti and things like that. If your park nearby is still open, and it's hard to tell because the national park website is not being updated right now, so you'll have to just call or check your local news. See if there's a volunteer group going there and cleaning up trash and helping to preserve its beauty.
That'd be a great Martin Luther King Jr. activity. We so need to pull together.
That would be perfect. That's a really good suggestion. Okay, well, all of those great ideas. Let's turn now to Earthling Questions. The first one is Miso in Chicago asks, I am trying to find out what is the best method to try to locate other people that may want items to repurpose for art, etc. Our company is downsizing, and we may have about 100 metal bookends that I can't seem to give away, and I'm not certain if they are recyclable, which will ultimately mean throwing them away if I can't find someone who's willing to take them. The same goes for some heavy-duty plastic magazine racks, binder clips, paper clips, etc. I really hate to throw these things away and would love to give them to some artist or group that is into recycling or upcycling, but time is of the essence. Does anyone at this organization have any suggestions?
Well, our initial answer to Miso was that there are two arts and crafts oriented donation sites in the Chicago area that you could send the stuff to. But there are many such organizations out there, and sometimes it just takes doing some research in your community. First and foremost, those metal bookends are recyclable. They're scrap metal, and if you can't find somebody to take them, there are people who would literally buy that at that volume. On the other hand, the plastic magazine racks, binder clips, and paper clips are things that any office or organization can use, and we'd urge you to go to St. Vincent de Paul or to Habitat for Humanity or other places that collect this kind of material and make it available to people at a low cost or for free because they're in need. Those are good steps to take. And I know, Evelyn, you have a lot of experience with craft stuff. Mm-hmm. Stores. Yeah, I have. There's a local store in Tacoma that whenever I have, if I come across sort of a volume of stuff or have stuff at home, that I first contact them, usually through Facebook, and I show them a picture and say, "Would you be interested in this?" Because I don't want to give them something that they can't use. But they use everything. I mean, corks, all kinds of different fiber, all kinds of odds and ends. They're happy to have, and they use it in their art camps. But, the other thing is, especially with office supplies, that I found that was a big surprise to me. I have a friend who's a high school teacher, and their budgets are so tight that, she was trying to figure out even how to extend to buy staples. And so, I would say either put out on Facebook that you have these things available, or, contact some friends who are in the public schools, because they may be able to use these and would be quite grateful for them if they're office supplies. Great point about the schools. Teachers are limited to spending $250 to $400 a year on that they can write off, but many of them spend a lot more. I know this because my wife is a teacher. Mm-hmm. Contact your local school and offer this stuff to them. I think that would make a huge dent in the needs that they have. Yeah, so there are a lot of suggestions there. So our next question is quite interesting, I think. It is Becky from Cincinnati, who asked on Facebook. Becky says, "Hi, I import fabric from India.
I have hundreds of plastic bags so the fabric is shipped in. They are crinkly and don't feel exactly like the grocery plastic bags. I can't figure out how to recycle them. How do I figure out how to recycle them?
So Trey, diagnostically, how would you answer the question of my plastic is crinkly? What is it?
So the suggestion I would give to Becky is to contact the company she has imported the fabric from and ask what resin the plastic is made of. Grocery stores typically will only accept polyethylene, which is going to be number 2 or number 4, high density or low density. I'm doubting if she says they're crinkly that they're number 2 or number 4. They're probably going to be number 5, I would think, but I have no way of knowing. And if there's no number and a symbol on them, there's no way for her to know either. The manufacturer that sent the fabric should know. Since Becky's based in Cincinnati, where Kroger is, she could ask them. They're a great recycler of plastic bags. They might have some connections for bags that are not made of polyethylene, since they probably get that question a lot.
And you're raising an interesting point about knowing what's in your supply chain. So in this case, Becky is a business and she's importing something that has this packaging that she doesn't have any use for. That packaging should be clearly labeled, or at least it should be explained to her in such a way that she can recycle it. And so it is really the producer's responsibility to help her understand that. And you make a good point. Rather than looking for an answer, why not just ask the people who are giving you the stuff?
I think that's probably the best place to start. There may be also, if it's not a recyclable plastic bag, again, you might be able to get creative and find some other uses for it. I know that there are groups that cut the plastic shopping bags into strips and then crochet them into mats that they hand out to the homeless to give them a little bit of padding from the cold surfaces that they may be sleeping or sitting on. So, I would say start with trying to do a recycle. That's going to be the most efficient. And then if you can't recycle, you may want to do some additional looking around for people that are using fabric bags and repurposing them.
Another thing is, if it has been the same plastic bags every time, she may want to contact the importer and say, hey, can I send these back to you? Because you'd be amazed how many plastic bags you can fit in a box. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to pay for the shipping, but if they're going to reuse them again, they might not be opposed to getting them back.
That's a good suggestion.
Or be really hard-hearted and say, we'd like you to take them back because you keep sending them to us. It also makes them think about how they package their material. I don't, and this is a thing that consumers or business owners can do, is turn the question back around and say, you're burdening me with a recycling problem. Why don't we work together, supplier and me, to solve this problem?
Mm-hmm. Really good suggestions. So our last question comes from Claudia, who is in Oregon, and she is concerned about the problem with plastic recycling. In particular, she says in Oregon, the problem seems to be that there is contaminated recycled material like plastic, that people mix garbage or trash with plastic, and then China is rejecting this. So consequently, either the plastic goes into landfill or it can't be recycled. And she thinks that the problem might be solved by allowing people to drop off their plastic at the transfer station and having someone there inspect for contamination. So what are your thoughts about that? We've talked about this before, but I think it's just always bears repeating, this problem that we're having with getting our plastics recycled.
I think the trick is that every material recovery facility, or MRF for short, has a different level of technology just based on what the city has invested. Some are able to weed out contamination a lot better than others. The best suggestion I can give consumers right now is, if they're worried about their waste output, look for packaging that's made from number 1 and number 2 plastic, because those are the ones that we are recycling in the United States on a regular basis. Anything 3 through 3.7, we were often shipping those over to China. So basically, you can help solve the problem by finding alternatives that have a ready recycling market here in the United States.
Can you give me some example trays of what is a typical 1 or 2 plastic item?
So the best way I would say for a substitution is going to be with yogurt containers. Mm-hmm. Yogurt containers are often made of polypropylene, which is number 5 plastic. So look on the bottom, Some of them are made from high density polyethylene, such as Stonyfield Farms. They make theirs, I believe, from HDPE. But just look on the bottom of the container. That's a great way to not buy number 5, buy number 2 instead until we get this resolved nationally.
And that's really the question of how does this single stream approach that we have now, where everything goes in one big blue bin, gets mixed together, and then has to be resorted at the MRF. And that's something that we have increasingly sophisticated logistics technology to help solve. So there may be an Uber of trash like RTS that we interviewed back in October, who can solve some of this problem as well.
That's good.
They could pick up stuff based on what it is rather than just picking up from a location.
Mm-hmm. But I appreciate that tip of look for 1 and 2 because we know those can be recycled within this country. I am definitely going to make that change. Definitely.
Yep. Yeah. 2 versus 5 is probably going to be the trickiest plastic identification because 1 versus 2, 1 floats and one sinks. So it's easy for the recycler to separate them apart. Mm-hmm. 2 and 5, it's all about optically sorting. So it makes it a lot more challenging to identify them. So you could have a situation where you're sending a stream of 5s that has some 2 in them because the sorter wasn't able to identify them.
Interesting.
Another thing that we can do too is contact companies that we would like to support and encourage them to create more recyclable packaging.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point too. All right. Any other tips on either getting involved in the community or keeping warm this winter before we wrap up?
Well, remember to check about burn bans before you light a fire.
Oh, good tip. Good tip.
We have a lot of fog this year in the Northwest, and some of it is because of people burning their fireplace.
One random tip that I have for staying warm is to remove screens from your south-facing windows in the winter, and then to put them back on the screen in the spring, because by having the windows out, you can get more solar radiation in through your windows. So that can also
I've never really thought about that, but that's amazing.
Yeah, I do that every winter. I always keep my west screens in because we have strong winds from the west, so that actually helps insulate, but the south-facing windows. And another thing, too, a lot of people have storm windows that they're not aware of, and they don't bring them down in the winter, but that creates an extra barrier as well. So if you have storm windows, make sure they're down in the winter.
Wow, really good tips. Okay, so that's all for this episode. Keep warm. If you have some additional ideas for thriving this winter, please get in touch with us. You can send us email at feedback@earth911.com, and you can also always find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and of course at our earth911.com website. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.